The radical left has taken over the Democratic Party.
Hello and welcome to Think Progressively, covering politics and all the other chaos life has to offer. This is episode 112, recorded on Saturday, yes it's different, February 3rd from Milwaukee. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jason.
And on today's episode, we continue our dissection of the coddling of the American mind. But first, the headlines.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
Let's start off with some, I would say, very good news. Local news, statewide news. We have talked on a couple of past episodes about the lawsuit over Wisconsin's gerrymandered maps. Well, just a couple of days ago, consultants hired by the Wisconsin Supreme Court have filed their official report with the court and concluded that the Republican and Wisconsin Institute of Law and Liberty maps are a partisan gerrymander who do not need consideration.
So the biased, bought and paid for consultants by the Democratic Party of Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Threw out the conservative maps. Is that what you're trying to say?
Absolutely. Two political scientists from outside the state.
Biased. Paid for by...
I mean, for what it's worth,
Hunter Biden.
Statistically speaking, political scientists tend to skew more liberal, so you got me. But yes, according to the report, they have looked at all 6 submissions, including the several liberal maps, including the 2 conservative maps that were submitted. And a quote from the report says, "From a social science perspective, the legislature's plans does not deserve further consideration." And like I said before, they also rejected the map from Will due to numerous other issues they complained about in the report, which we'll also link in the show notes.
And I like the one that does not deserve further consideration is basically the one we use now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that shows you how great that was and what we've been operating under for the last 14 years here in the state of Wisconsin.
The consultants did not endorse any particular map, calling the other 4 maps basically indistinguishable from each other from a social science perspective. They're going to basically let it back to the Supreme Court, let them pick on whatever criteria they want to emphasize the most. But from their standpoint, at least according to the report, all these 4 maps are good. Which, again, I am just shocked to hear that the Senate Democrats map is also fine, because that's pretty skewed Democrat too.
And I do believe that they also said that they do not want to make their own map.
They do not. They
unless
will.
They're ordered to
Yeah,
do
they
so.
will if they have to, but they would prefer the court to choose one of the maps. And another domino falls in trying to get rid of these stupid freaking maps. I cannot wait, man. I cannot wait.
It will be a big day in Wisconsin, a big day for our future here.
But not for Will.
No, not for the conservative legal action group.
Or Robin Voss. He's also very upset.
Bad day for popcorn in the state of Wisconsin.
Man, it was a bad day once he created that company, don't you? Don't you say it was just now.
Let's go to some other state news. We'll go to Oregon, where Thursday, 10 Republican state senators are ruled to be ineligible for running for re-election by the Oregon State Supreme Court.
Wow, we're stealing maps in Wisconsin. We're stopping people from running it. Wait, stop the steal. It has a point, you guys.
These 10 Republican state senators were part of one of the longest, I think might be the record for the longest walkout, which lasted 6 weeks during May and June of last year and prevented a quorum in the state Senate, halting hundreds of bills from being voted on in the state legislature there. The walkout was over legislation to protect abortion and transgender medical rights, as well as gun control.
You know, the things you want to walk out of your job for.
Right. The things that the people of the state of Oregon voted in the liberal Democratic senators in order to do led to the conservatives walking out. I've never been a big fan of that type of protest. Obviously, it happened here in Wisconsin.
I'm glad you brought it. I was actually going to say the same thing, too, with like Act 10 and stuff.
And it did absolutely nothing here.
No.
It accomplished absolutely nothing. Unfortunately, in Oregon, it did work to some extent. The legislators returned to work only after a compromise was reached to change some language in the bill surrounding abortion and drop most of the gun control measures, including raising the minimum age for purchasing a semi-automatic rifle from 18 to 21 and placing limits on concealed carry. So if you can't win at the ballot box, Joe, just take your ball and go home.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And refuse to come back until they do what you want. Not the vote, voters, but
This is how governance works.
yes. So
This is what I learned in the
not
West
a
Wing.
fan of this. And it has been something that's being used more and more. We saw this happen multiple times in the federal government. The House lawmakers have left committee hearings multiple times in order to prevent votes. It happened during the hearing to subpoena Harlan Crow and Leonard Leo due to their involvement in the corruption with the Supreme Court. And because this has been an ongoing concern, the state of Oregon, the voters, actually passed a measure in 2022 amending the state constitution to bar lawmakers from re-election who had more than 10 unexcused absences. And it was due to that measure that the Oregon Secretary of State disqualified those involved in the walkout from running. That Secretary of State's decision was just upheld by the Oregon Supreme Court after 5 of the barred lawmakers sued the state over not being allowed on the ballot. They argue that...
On what ground?
They argued that the law doesn't mean they're barred from the upcoming election, but the next election after that.
What?
That was their argument, which was rejected.
Well, yeah, because that's stupid.
Yes, it is.
Well, good job, Oregon. Proud of you.
And our final stories we have for you are a couple of Trump dates.
I see what you did there.
Yeah.
Like
Trump updates, Trump dates.
And I'm just going to start it off.
Not dating Donald Trump. That would be very bad.
I'm going to be honest, when I first saw that, that's what I thought you were going for. I wasn't really sure what was going on. I will say, I'm going to start this section off, though, with a number. 83.3 million. Let that sink in.
Which Trump might not actually have, despite claiming to be a multi-billionaire. This was the award given to E. Jean Carroll in the Trump defamation case. Now, though this is the second chronologically closed case, it was actually the first defamation lawsuit that was brought by E. Jean Carroll, which at the time was halted by then Attorney General William Barr, who argued that Trump made the defamatory statements about Carroll under his official capacity as president and was therefore immune to any lawsuit. After one, William Barr was no longer the Attorney General, and it was the Biden administration. And also, Donald Trump kept making the same defamatory statements after being president, thus proving to everyone that it was not a part of his official capacity as president, because he was no longer president and making the same statements. It was ruled that this lawsuit could go on after being halted for years. Some highlights from this case: the judge chastised Donald Trump multiple times for speaking during others' testimony, and he said that he knew Trump would likely want to be barred from the courtroom. So then Trump could claim to be the victim and being persecuted by a biased judge. The judge knew that was the tactic he was going for, and instead of giving him what he wanted, just pointed out that, I know what you're trying to do. Also, Trump's lawyer, Alina Habba, found herself in hot water with the judge for continuing to argue after the judge made a ruling. I believe he told her to sit down, and then she said she doesn't like being talked to in that manner, which, yeah, that's how you talk to a judge in their own courtroom.
Right.
It's always going to get you everything you want. And also for not understanding how to introduce evidence multiple times. She tried to bring up evidence during witness testimony without having introduced it into evidence previously, which is not how trial law works. You have to introduce evidence ahead of time. And then, after introducing the evidence, did not follow the judge's instructions for labeling that evidence, and then made the same exact mistake again during closing arguments. Tried to introduce some Twitter statements. She said, everybody gets death threats on social media. I've gotten multiple in the past, again, without introducing anything into evidence. You can't just make statements off the top of your head as a lawyer. If you're Trump's lawyer, maybe that's how you think law works. I don't know. You just watch.
The best people, man. Did you actually happen to see? She also did I don't know if she did multiple press conferences, but I did see one press conference with her where she even doubled down on the whole Trump conspiracy thing, like that. He's being persecuted among all the courtrooms, saying this was the most appalling display I've ever seen as my time as an attorney.
Right. My 2 months as an attorney.
Oh, nothing but the best. That's what we gotta say,
Yes, he hires only the best people. Speaking of which, our second Trump date, Trump's valet and co-defendant in the Mar-a-Lago document case, Walt Nauta, was accused of sexual misconduct and removed from his White House position before being hired by Donald Trump.
Cool.
Walt Nauta was a Navy serviceman assigned to the President's Support Detail since 2012, so during the Obama administration, and was removed from that position in 2021 and lost his White House security clearance after allegations from 3 women, also in the Navy, of fraternization, adultery, harassment, and other inappropriate sexual conduct, including revenge porn.
Oh, great.
According to a report by the Daily Beast. Weeks after being removed from his position, Walt was in Palm Beach, Florida, receiving a paycheck from Trump's Save America Leadership PAC. So yes, only the best people get hired by Donald Trump.
My God.
He is now facing 6 felony indictments, including concealing a document in a federal investigation, conspiracy to obstruct justice, making false statements and representations as part of the confidential document trial. One of the 4 trials still going on against Donald Trump.
Well, and while you were talking about that, it just makes me think about how we made fun of Ron DeSantis for having the worst people around him possible. And then I just saw this again. I'm like, man, what a low bar Ron had to clear and still somehow fail.
Well, you remember just at this point, so Biden's been president for, it's almost been 4 years now. How many cabinet positions and administrative positions did Trump go through at this point in his administration? It was just ridiculous. And you can see the contrast between Biden and Trump just on that alone.
All right. Which is, again, and we'll make an episode about Trump and Biden are not the same. For the love of God.
M&Ms will not be satisfied until every last cartoon character is deeply unappealing and totally androgynous. Until the moment you wouldn't want to have a drink with any one of them. That's the goal. When you're totally turned off, they've won.
Boy, ain't right.
I hate you.
So for Foxed in the Head this week, we just watched the Ben Shapiro and cringe rapper Tom McDonald rap song Facts.
This is what happens when I let you pick the topic.
We're not going to make you listen to the whole thing because it's pretty terrible, just like every Tom McDonald song. But I have a couple clips that I want to play. They're very short, I promise. So we'll play the first one here.
I don't wanna talk to folks who don't get it. Go woke, go broke, no hope, it's pathetic. Pro-choice, pronouns, pro-love, you're progressive. But you ain't pro-gun, no one to protect it. Where the American flags at? Remember when people would hang those? They've been taken down, they all been replaced with BLM flags or a rainbow. This ain't
You cannot find any American flags anywhere. They've all been taken down and replaced with BLM flags or a rainbow, pride flags. Remember when people would hang those? Says Canadian rapper Tom McDonald. I'm not sure where he's remembering all of the American flags because it certainly wasn't in his own life. He must be living someone else's.
Oh, man. Also, can we just... Okay, they can't see it, but, I mean, it's all over the internet. I've seen pictures of Ben Shapiro, with standing next to Tom McDonald. That's what's been floating around and stuff like that. I've been avoiding this song because, I just couldn't take it. He looks so uncomfortable.
He does.
I
thought it was AI at first.
That's what I thought at first, too.
Right.
Because Tom McDonald kind of just looks like... He's got that weird, old school Limp Bizkit feeling to it. But,
yeah, very, very Fred Durst.
Like Wish.com Limp Bizkit, and he's just rocking out, and I can, from a musical standpoint, I can see he's got it going. He
has some flow,
he has some charisma.
Most of it's auto-tuned, which I absolutely can't stand.
But you can at least tell, okay, this is a guy who's actually trying to be a rapper. Fine, it's okay. But then Ben's there, and he is so the hoodie's way too big for him.
Right.
He looks so
it's the first time he's ever worn a hoodie in his life.
He looks like a little pudding cup. Just this awkwardly stay yeah, here we go. I'm here. What do I do? It's so hilarious. Oh God.
And what did we learn from the Thought Crime podcast last week? Tom McDonald is a diversity hire in the world of hip hop.
I thought you were talking about how black people can't fly planes. Oh,
DEI rapper Tom McDonald.
Oh, man. Okay.
So now, of course, what does everyone want? We want to listen to the Ben Shapiro verse. Ben Shapiro actually has a verse. Again, I swear I thought it was AI generated.
Yeah, me too.
But here, let's listen to this.
Let's look at the stats. I've got the facts. My money like Lizzo, my pockets are fat. Homie, I'm epic. Don't be a wap. Dog, it's a yarmulke. Homie, no cap. Look at the graphs. Look at my charts. You're blowing money on strippers and cars. You go into prison. I'm on television. Dogs, no one knows who you are. Keep hating on me on the internet. My comment section all woke Karens. And I make racks off compound interest. Y'all live with your parents. Nikki, take some notes. I just did this for fun. All my people download this. Let's get a Billboard #1.
This ain't rap.
Oh, like, he started okay. I mean,
Yeah, at the end, it got really robotic.
yeah, like the lyrics were like, you know what? Okay, we can analyze the lyrics and they suck. But like, he was kind of going for a little bit. Like, okay, cool. Like, you got some, you have some kind of weird rhythm going, and then literally,
Well, he's rapping slower than he normally talks.
right. Well, now I also understand like where like the Nicki comment came from, because I'm like, why is Nicki Minaj just randomly congratulate Ben Shapiro on Twitter about this? Now I get it.
Right.
But
And I don't see, there's no focus as to what this song is supposed to be as a whole. Like, it's called Facts. There are no actual facts in the entire song, except maybe Ben Shapiro pointing out that he's wearing a yarmulke. Like, maybe that is a fact, I suppose. But there are no facts anywhere in this. Is Ben Shapiro trying to address other rappers?
well, let's talk about it. Okay, because so my money like Lizzo, my pockets are fat. Okay, so we're just doing a fat joke to start you off, like.
Right, but again,
Really?
compared to like Nicki Minaj, Ben Shapiro is broke.
Yeah.
Ben Shapiro is a po' boy.
I
So
think compared to Lizzo, Ben's.
oh yeah, certainly too. But then, and he's like, "You're blowing money on strippers and cars." Okay,
You're
so
going to prison on television. Like, who are you talking to?
right, no one knows who you are. Like, okay, who do you mean?
You're dissing
now?
somebody, but I think you're literally dissing like some random comment
It
section.
changes with every verse. Keep hating on me on the internet. My comments section all woke Karens, which is not true. They're all Ben Shapiro dick riders. If you've ever been on any comment section for the Daily Wire, you know, and Karens are conservative. Karens are not woke.
And I make racks off compound interest.
Y'all live with your parents, okay? Again, so now we're addressing normal people who don't like Ben Shapiro.
I don't know, man. I don't know.
But then he takes a shot at Nicki Minaj, and then the call to action, like every great rap song, is please download this so I can make money.
Well, okay,
But I thought your pockets were fat.
but okay, I also just have to like read it verbatim. The homie, I'm epic. Don't be a wap.
Which, yeah, is just absolutely meaningless.
Dog, it's a yarmulke, homie, no cap. Like, what the fuck? Oh, man. Now, here's the real question. Who wrote this?
You gotta assume it was Tom McDonald, but it's bad. But he's not a very good rapper.
I could make an argument. Right, that's the thing.
His verses are actually worse than Ben Shapiro's, to be honest.
But
it's just standard conservative complaining about people being upset and triggered, while the entire song is you being upset and triggered at society.
Right. And I was going to say, like, this sounds like a Tom McDonald verse that Ben just rapped. But then, like, those last two lines where he just like, Nikki, take some notes. I just did this for fun.
Right,
All
yeah.
my people download this. Let's get a Billboard #1. Like,
Yeah.
like, there's no way Tom McDonald would actually write that. Oh, God. Oh. And they did. They got a Billboard #1 off of it.
Which is not hard to do these days. It was like reported that it was on iTunes.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Top download.
You're right. It was a top download song. It wasn't
Which,
Billboard.
because nobody buys music anymore.
Right.
Everybody streams everything.
Oh, man.
Well, at least, unlike the rich men north of Richmond phenomenon that was short-lived, it won't come out that Ben Shapiro's really not as conservative as everyone thinks, and he just didn't understand what he was writing. So I guess they have that going for them. But I do have a couple Ben Shapiro tweets, now that he is a rap star, that I wanted to bring back up here. We have from October 3rd, 2011. Listening to Mozart, that some people listen to rap rather than Mozart, is objective proof that some people are stupid. Hashtag, yup, I said it. And January 8th, 2012.
Here's the actual fact.
Fact. Rap isn't music. And if you think it is, you're stupid.
Oh, what an idiot, dude. And okay, I'm going to spend too much time, so I can't go into it, man. But back in the day when that was like the big controversy with Ben Shapiro, where he tried to like academically prove or intellectually prove that rap wasn't music, I would get so angry. Because do you remember like when he actually tried to do that?
No.
So he debated a rap, like an actual rapper, I can't remember who it was, that came onto a show about whether or not rap was actually music. And he said, well, he would also say like his dad was a musicologist and that he knows music inside and out, so therefore he has like the dominant theory of what music actually is. Keep in mind, like when he tries to define what music is, it's not the like actual common definition that most like mainstream like music theory nerds use.
I do know Ben Shapiro is a trained violinist.
He is. But basically he tried to say that all music by definition is made up of rhythm, melody, and harmony. And that rap is just rhythm. It doesn't have melody or harmony in it. Therefore, it's not considered music.
Well, I don't know if he proved anything in that debate, but he may have just proved that rap is not music right now by making this song. Maybe this was the whole point of this.
Oh God, he's such an idiot. He's such a like sheltered little dweeb. And it just screams that where it's like, you know what, Ben? I'm sure you're really smart. I believe that you're smart. I believe that you're well educated.
But he did say
Christ, you are sheltered.
He did say that when global warming effects start happening, all of the people in the flooded coastal areas can just sell their homes.
Oh God, I remember
so
that.
I don't know about him being all that smart.
Top conservative intellectual, you guys. Top conservative.
The cool kids philosopher.
Oh God, I still hate you. Don't subject me to this.
That was really a productive segment, wasn't it? It's hard to get any word in with this clown.
So welcome back to part 2 of talking about the book, The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff. In the previous chapter, we discussed the 3 great untruths: what doesn't kill you makes you weaker, always trust your feelings, and life is a battle between good people and evil people. You know, common things that us liberals always try to adapt in our lives.
You hear it all the time.
Absolutely, especially on college campuses. We can now talk about some examples they bring up of these beliefs in action. So basically, the next part of this book is the real world consequences of these beliefs. Haidt and Lukianoff start off their section with some examples of intimidation and violence. They extensively talk about the riots when Milo Yiannopoulos was supposed to speak at Berkeley. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
They discuss the Middlebury protests of Charles Murray, the guy who wrote the Bell Curve book, which was a big thing back in the day.
Right, the book that argues that intelligence is genetic and some races are just more intelligent than others, with, of course, Caucasians being near the top and sub-Saharan Africans being near the bottom. I can't imagine why that was so controversial. It's also been highly debunked and proven to be absolutely garbage science after it was released.
Correct. It's that guy. And Allison Stanger, who was set to moderate that discussion. Just for quick reference for each of those, the protests at UC Berkeley started off peaceful, but then actually swept up into some pretty big riots. Buildings were damaged, things were burned, bad stuff.
Unfortunately, not Charles Murray.
No. And then at Middlebury, protesters chased Murray and Stanger off campus. Stanger recounted that protesters shoved both of them aggressively and also aggressively pulling her hair to the point where they had to actually go to the hospital. I think she received a concussion from it. Protesters also surrounded them in their car while pounding on the glass, and police had to ultimately pave a way for them to actually leave campus safely. I would also argue that these should be condemned. I mean, these were pretty brutal acts of violence towards people that I don't think deserved it.
At least not Allison Stanger. She worked for the
university.
Right. Yeah, she was a professor at the university and not espousing the same ridiculous speech that leads to hate and oppression that Charles Murray does.
And I also think it's important to note that much of this violence actually was carried out by outside anti-fascist groups, not students themselves. Most of the evidence that points to students are actually just weird anecdotal, like social media posts and stuff like that, that don't really point to anything. Most actual evidence portrays that it was outside people coming into these campuses to start the violent riots. So again, I think we should not dismiss these things, but also understand the actual context that these aren't just woke students going awry here. Then the authors pair these two examples with two 2017 surveys. One went viral because it said that nearly 20% of college students supported using violence to censor speech they disagree with. You saw New York Times articles cite this survey, Washington Post, a lot of mainstream news outlets. The two others did admit that there have been widespread critiques of this survey from its lack of transparency and underrepresented sampling. Basically, it wasn't a randomized sample at all, but tried to claim it was. So deception, which was also cool. And they also don't bring up the fact that it was a Koch-funded study. So that's fun. I will actually include an entire debunk of this if you really want to look into it as well in the show notes. But basically, be highly skeptical of this study. The other one found that 30% agreed with the statement, if someone is using hate speech or making racially charged comments, physical violence can be justified to prevent this person from espousing their hateful views. And they use this and gasp. 30%, man.
Right.
30% of students.
It's actually probably higher than that, really. If you talk about someone who is verbally harassing someone, that physical violence can be justified to shut them up, I'm surprised it's as low as 30%.
Well, and actually, you just point out the main flaw that a lot of people also pointed out, which is this isn't about like a random speaker on college campuses. This is just a generic question about like, hey, someone at the bar could be
Right.
like harassing you and calling you the N-word. Do you think violence is okay in that situation? And some people are like, yeah, sure, why not? Of course.
Hey, we live in Wisconsin. Go up to any random person and tell them that the Packers suck. And I bet you get punched in the face more than 30% of the time.
No, that's not true. That's not true. I was going to have you say Packers like that. I was just going to, you saw the...
They do. I mean,
it's just a natural instinct.
And that is a fact that does not care about your feelings.
Write that down, Tom. Second, this is another example of how Light and Lukianoff tried to pretend college students are something special and different from the rest of the population. Some stuff that I found from a very 30-second Google search includes data from a 2017 study from the Cato Institute, which is a conservative think tank, found that 32% of all Americans said it was morally acceptable to punch a Nazi. So we already have more
I learned
than
that
30%.
from Captain America.
Yeah. And another 2023 survey from the University of Chicago found that at least 32 million Americans think violence is justified to coerce government officials, and 12 million think it's justified to restore Donald Trump to the White House.
Yeah, we saw what happened on January 6th.
And to make things worse, they tried to then cite their own study from Fire that actually debunks their entire rationale here, which basically says, quote, from their own study, very few students report that they might participate in actions that prevent a guest speaker event from taking place. 5% of students might take down flyers, 4% might try to prevent other students from attending it, 2% might make noise during the event.
That's always my favorite, the shouting down of the speaker.
Right. And 1% of students might use violence to disrupt it. So you have 1% of all students saying they are maybe using violence in a random hypothetical survey.
Mm-hmm. And then again, like I said last time, you can't criticize them for retreating to safe spaces and not being anywhere near these kinds of events that they find objective and calling them babies for doing that. And then also criticize them for actively working against this speech that they do not like.
Right.
But those are the two options. What should they do? Oh, go there and listen to it and see if it'll change your mind. If you're going to protest Charles Murray, you already know who Charles Murray is. You already know the bell curve. That's not being sheltered from that idea. You already know. Otherwise, you just wouldn't have any idea who he was or what was going on. So just the entire thesis of this book to me makes no sense.
Right. And it's also extremely telling because these authors bring up this exact survey I just told you about only 8 pages after they bring up the first 2 surveys. And they'll talk about how, like, yeah, only 1% of students will actually think about doing something. But don't you remember these other surveys? And then they just move on. That's all it is. Then if it couldn't get any weirder to talk about violence, they talk about Charlottesville. Not a place I thought they were going to go to in this book, but they do. The authors do condemn the attacks in Charlottesville. They do mention the death of Heather Heyer, which was the unfortunate victim who was run over by a car when a neo-Nazi tried to run through a group of protesters. And they also mentioned that Donald Trump said there were very fine people on both sides. But then they also, instead of really condemning why this was happening and how this influences discourse on college campuses, they shift focus and talk about how colleges and college students on the left use this tragedy to censor more speech on college campuses, which I found was a bit distasteful. I don't know, like you had it right there where it's like you had real violence that caused someone's death that did not come from a college campus.
And you had white nationalists marching with torches saying Jews will not replace us.
But the colleges are the problem. Are you serious? Just the dishonesty of this book just makes me so angry. And we're going to get more into that because after violence, they talk about witch hunts. And we're going to start this chapter off comparing what's happening on college campuses to the acts of the Red Guards, who basically exposed people as pro-capitalist enemies of the state during Mao's Chinese Revolution in the 1960s. So I have this gem for you to read, Jason. I thought you would enjoy this line.
As historical events, the two movements are radically different, most notably in that the Red Guards were supported by a totalitarian dictator who encouraged them to use violence, while American college students have been self-organized and almost entirely nonviolent. Yet there are similarities, too. For example, both movements were initiated by idealistic students fighting for what seemed to them a noble ideal, the remaking of society along egalitarian lines.
So you know, basically the same thing.
Don't fight for what you believe in because you're just puppets of the communist Chinese government?
I can't get over the line of, well...
They are completely
different.
Diametrically opposed. But they're the same in some ways.
But there are similarities.
Yeah.
It's like, come on. Like, it's such bullshit, man. I can't get over this. And again, this is about how colleges and college students are being too hyperbolic.
Well, it's the trope of every villain thinks that they're the hero, but then follow that up with, so don't try to be a hero, because you'll end up being a villain.
Right. Hai Lukiao then continue about how it's not just college students who are the problem, but professors too, saying how instead of defeating each other in debate in academic articles, using the facts and logic that we learned so carefully about in our previous section, scholars are now calling for retractions to silence speech they don't like. And boy, oh boy, did they give me a nice case study to talk about. Do you know anything about Amy Wax?
I do not.
So...
Is that like turtle wax?
No, not at all. It's much more racist.
I don't know, turtle wax.
I didn't either, and I looked it up because I'm like, I don't know what this is. I kind of sense BS from this section. Man, what did I find was just insane. So Amy Wax is a law professor at the University of Pennsylvania. In 2017, she and Larry Alexander wrote an op-ed in a Philadelphia newspaper titled "Paying the Price for Breakdown of the Country's Bourgeois Culture." In it, they attribute many of today's social and economic problems to our country, quote, fading away from the bourgeois cultural script. They give examples such as getting an education, getting married before having kids, and hard work are the things that are fading away from our country.
Sounds like Ben Shapiro wrote some of this.
The real controversial quote from the article was, all cultures are not equal, or at least they are not equal in preparing people to be productive in an advanced economy.
All cultures.
So that's not good. A week later, a bunch of grad students, faculty, and alumni from the university wrote an open letter condemning the article, specifically calling it racist and that it pushed for white supremacy.
Right.
Yeah.
And I bet you there was more context that made it very clear what she was saying. Because, yeah, out of context, all cultures are not equal, or at least not equal in preparing people to be productive in advanced economy. You could give that the better. I can see where you could say that, like, I know what she really means, and also maybe she doesn't mean it like that. So I'm guessing there were some more context clues as well in there.
I'll give you some more context clues, Jason. That's where Haidt and Lukianoff leave it. Wax made a controversial statement in an article, and rather than overcoming her claims with facts and logic, a bunch of professors simply condemned it. That's what they're upset about. Like, why didn't you actually take these ideas head on? Well, I did a little extra digging because I'd never heard about this controversy before, and here's what they don't tell you. After the initial controversy and before the letter, Wax did an interview with the school's newspaper where she said, while talking about her racist statements, "I don't shrink from the word superior. Everyone wants to go to countries ruled by white Europeans."
Yep.
And another quote from the interview, "I don't think I've ever seen a black student graduate in the top quarter of the class and rarely in the top half."
Yep. That's the thing, is those are the things that you could read between the lines in the quote that you had from the article previously.
But you had a hold my beer moment.
Right.
Let me just tell you exactly.
Like, in case you had problems reading between those lines, here's what it says.
I also have to add that the dean of Penn Law School, after those those comments came out, said that Wax was spoken disparagingly and inaccurately and had been barred from teaching core curriculum classes, and basically had to write an entire statement about how everything she just said about black students in her university were just not true at all. So now you're just racist and wrong on top of everything else. So good job, Amy.
Oh, why don't you write a academic paper about how black people aren't stupid, John? That's what a real scientist would do.
Exactly. And we'll get to that, I promise. But we're not even done yet, because even with all that, she still has not been fired from her job. She still is teaching at the University of Pennsylvania today.
10 years of bitch.
And it's been 6 years since that horrible censoring of free speech, and Wax is still being investigated, supposedly, for her comments. And she actually hasn't stopped saying stuff either. Just 2 years ago, she faced suspension again for publicly stating the United States is better off with fewer Asians and less Asian immigration.
Which is also not consistent with her other racism. Because if her whole thing is some cultures are better at preparing you for life in advanced economies, just statistically speaking, wouldn't Asian cultures be at the top of that list?
Nah, they're not white.
Well, right. So she's not consistent in how she expresses her racism.
When she says that superiority is for the white people, she means it. And of course, I also found that FIRE, the organization led by Lukyanov, of course, invited her to speak last year at one of their conferences. So, we're dealing with really top tier, good, active people here.
Right. I just can't get over after the first part about like people finishing at the top of their classes, and that's the problem with black culture. But then also we need fewer Asians who, again, if you're just going based
there's no logic behind it.
They're at the top of the classes in the most part. They get like the scholarships because they have better academic scores on average. At least be logical with your racism is what I'm saying. Have a consistent worldview, goddammit.
If that's the lesson we're going to take away from this episode is if you're going to be racist, be consistent.
Right. Well, it's like the flat earth people. Build your model of the flat earth and then stick to that. I'm still going to call you an idiot, but at least you'll be consistent.
Oh, and do you want to hear what really made my blood boil with this whole story?
So it's not the racist professor that keeps her job at Penn Law?
Surprisingly, no. It gets worse. Because in the book, the authors say, quote, they did not do what scholars are supposed to do. Use their abilities to show where Wax and Alexander were wrong. They simply condemned and categorically rejected Wax's claims. And my first thought was, well, that sounds like bullshit. So I looked it up. And unsurprisingly, I found a bunch of academic rebuttals against Wax's comments from other professors. And I knew this because at the end of that sentence that I just read you, they drop a little citation in there that references a blog debate between Haidt with Dr. Jonah Gelbeck, one of the professors who was most actively publicly critiquing Wax at the time. Just straight up lying. They are just absolutely just straight up lying and just hoping their readers are just not looking at their own citations and their own background information. And they're just making things up as it goes on. It's insane. This is where I kind of lost my last little bit of respect for Jonathan Haidt, because what do you need to do at this point to convince me that he's not just trying to sell you a particular narrative that's going with his biases, that he has no facts for, and he's willing to completely lie to make up his own narrative of what's going on with these very clear-cut cases of actual hate speech on college campuses where they actually should probably be censored for what they're saying.
Right. You would want those college kids to actually fight against that kind of speech. That is something to look up to in a future generation and not condemn as being triggered snowflakes. But that is the conservative viewpoint, right? Anytime that anyone condemns speech that they don't agree with, if it's something conservatives like, then it's being triggered snowflakes who want to stay in their bubble and need safe spaces. But if it's, say, protesting the Israeli government, then that's dangerous and needs to be protected against.
Right. And that's the example they used to talk about how bad retractions are and other professors are. They could have picked so many other examples, but the fact that they picked Amy Wax, which I'd never even heard of, and when I looked into it was so much worse than I could have ever imagined, just shows you how bad and flimsy their arguments are. That takes us then to Evergreen College, something you're probably quite familiar with, Jason.
Brett wants Weinstein.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
And because we just don't have time to go through this one as well, I'm going to quickly go through it. If you want a really good breakdown of what actually happened, I'm going to include a link to an episode of Serious Inquiries Only where Thomas Smith, the host of that podcast, does a really great job of just showing exactly what happened.
Oh, now we see the quid pro quo. he has you on his show. Now you're pitching his show to our massive audience.
Are exactly just as big amount of listeners as their show. And get ready, because I'm actually going to include some other links from their podcast later in this show. So you're welcome, Thomas. But just for a very quick recap of what happened. Evergreen College is a very small progressive liberal arts college, and the right-wing media loves constantly putting this school in the spotlight to demonize all schools. So just as a heads up, they are a very hardcore progressive school. They don't actually give grades. They kind of give evaluations of where you are instead of that.
Everybody gets a participation trophy.
Right. And you can actually just make up your own major, and they'll just try to figure out what your path is at this college. Well, at this college, every year they have a, quote, day of absence where students of color are encouraged to leave campus to show the impact of people of color on college campuses. In 2017, they switched the plan for 1 year to encourage white students to leave the campus and do the same activities students of color would do the year prior. Professor Weinstein, at that time, who was the super liberal progressive professor, took the noble stand for freedom and basically replied all in an email, I guess, saying that he was not comfortable with making white people do this and that this was like an act of aggression within itself because fine, whatever. Shut up, Brett. And then, as the authors admit, while there was some tension after Weinstein's initial email went out, the day of absence came and went without incident. A few months later, though, students went crazy and began aggressively protesting Weinstein and the entire school. Although, wink wink, what the authors don't tell you is that Weinstein saw a bunch of students of color marching to protest a different incident and began berating them in the hallway, and that's actually what triggered a lot of the whole backlash to Brett Weinstein, is that he berated college students in a random hallway. So, the super enlightened individual that we should be taking their word for in this situation. Because of this, students demanded meetings with administration where they screamed, hurled insults, and blocked doors so staff couldn't leave. Hyde Lukianov actually cites some random YouTube breakdown of the hearing where the guy blatantly misrepresents the video footage he is showing you in his own video. And Jason, if you doubt the research I'm doing, I watched this guy's YouTube videos for this stuff. I also thought it was kind of fun to list some of the guy's most recent videos to see how objective he was. Here's some examples. You ready? Why DI must die.
Everybody's boogeyman currently.
Wake up or go woke. A message from communist China. Trans daughter or prodigal son. And widowed by transition. Super reliable and unbiased source that an academic and a constitutional lawyer should be using in their own book. But that's basically what happened.
Honestly, Brett Weinstein, the way he's gone these days, is just as much of a kook as whatever this random YouTuber. If you've ever watched anything he's ever said about COVID.
Oh, I do.
That guy doesn't deserve to be anywhere near science or academia.
Well, did you see about how he also appeared on in anti-vax conferences and stuff like that too?
I'm not surprised. That's what his podcast has become.
Yeah, but this is just a good example of how these authors, as well as all other conservative media, focus on several small examples to claim there is a huge problem throughout academia. I don't know about you, Jason, but I'm even willing to say that Evergreen College is probably an institution I would never want my kids to really go to because it is kind of crazy over there, and you could probably find some better schools, I'm not going to lie. But it's a tiny college of 2,000 students. That's it. The other colleges this book mentions, Middlebury and Oberlin, that are used to show this horrible trend of schools nationwide, are less than 3,000 students. The college I went to was 13,000 students, Jason, and I was a D3 college.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you right now, this is not a widespread problem on these college campuses.
Well, I mean, it's no surprise a liberal arts college would be more sensitive to those kinds of things and have things like this day of absence. And honestly, just being like, well, this year, let's flip it and do, the white members of the college leave campus and, we'll see what that looks like.
Right.
Oh, stop trying to oppress me.
Well, keep in mind, this wasn't mandatory. This was just an optional thing that you could do for the day.
And it's an interesting experiment.
Yeah. And plus, you get to leave school for the day. What do you...
Run experiments in college?
Not
Never.
on white people.
Again, talk about a real triggered snowflake.
The next session we get into now is how we got here as a country. The authors talk about polarization for a little bit, which is generally fine, but it's whatever. They then talk about outrage from the campus right, which is what I want to really focus on from this chapter. We go back to Evergreen College for the other side of the story they conveniently left out in the prior chapter. I don't know why they didn't include this, because I think this is some pretty important context for this story to actually play out. They tell us that much of the outrage about the Evergreen College story came after Brett Weinstein went on Tucker Carlson to complain about how bad the kids are these days. And like Jason said, ever since then, Brett Weinstein has been like a figurehead for conservative douchebags to talk about how bad college liberals are. On top of that, far-right groups went to Evergreen College's campus to spray paint swastikas, dox and harass students of color, and hung up posters that read, "Black lives don't matter," and "Join your local Nazis." So, like straight up hate crime stuff.
Ron DeSantis supporters.
But these are exactly one and the same as what these horrible college students that were doing.
Yeah.
They then go into detail about how conservative media creates moral panics out of nothing and give the formula for how it works. And Jason, I wanted you just to read this formula and let me know how accurate it is.
All right. Step 1. A left-wing professor says or writes something provocative or inflammatory on social media, in mainstream media, in a lecture, or less often in an academic publication. The statement is often a reaction to perceived injustices committed by right-wing groups or politicians off campus. A video clip or screenshot is then shared on social media.
So that's step 1.
Step 2. Right-wing media outlets pick up the story and then retell it in ways that amplify the outrage, often taking it out of context and sometimes distorting the facts. Never from right-wing media. Step 3. Dozens or even hundreds of people who hear about it write angry posts or comments on social media or send emails to the professor, often including racist or sexist slurs, sometimes including threats of rape or death. Some people publicly call for the university to fire the professor.
So I would argue still good. Pretty accurate so far.
Step 4. Meanwhile, the college administration fails to defend the professor. Sometimes an investigation follows, and sometimes the professor is put on leave. Professors who are untenured are at high risk of being fired or of not having their contracts renewed.
And finally,
Step 5. Most partisans who hear any part of the story find that it confirms their worst beliefs about the other side. The right focuses on what the professor said or wrote. The left focuses on the racist, sexist reaction to it. With their anger fortified, people on both sides are primed to repeat the cycle.
so what are your thoughts?
Do they understand that they're making the argument against all of their positions in this book?
Yes! Exactly! I'm so upset. They lay the whole thing out. And they even go further to say things like how Turning Points USA threatens professors with their public watch list, and they try to dox professors on actual campus reform websites, which made me think, Jason, why aren't we talking about this then? Because this sounds way freaking worse, that there's an entire formula that drives this entire right-wing outrage throughout the entire country.
Did you hear that kids are demanding litter boxes be in schools?
Damn it, I was going to use that. That's a perfect example. What else I got? CRT. Let's use CRT.
Oh, it's DEI now.
Damn it.
Gotta keep up.
But yes, you're exactly correct with that, which is they lay out the whole formula of how a massively well-funded right-wing media sphere takes this information that is nothing and will turn into complete monstrous national outrage.
Well, and they try to conflate sending death threats and racist emails to people with being upset about the death threats and the racist emails. Oh, both of these groups are the same.
Yeah, right. And just as another good example of that, although we just talked about some examples in these episodes about this book because they gave them, I also highly recommend, here you go, Thomas Smith, the most recent episodes of Where There's Woke, which I'll actually include a link to one of my favorites in the notes as well, where they talk about a UW-Madison professor who basically triggered outrage on the right because a conservative student, who weirdly was also Miss Wisconsin, I guess, went on Tucker Carlson to talk about how horrible this guy was because he put put something in a syllabus. And that triggered tons of hate mail, tons of emails, investigations, the whole works, based on nothing. That was already reviewed by the university.
Well, how dare you get outraged about it, Joe? Your partisan reaction to this story shows that you are continuing the cycle of outrage.
Ugh, shut up. Let me vent. Their last section is about where we go from here. Basically, they give several topics of advice of how to raise, quote, wiser kids, which tend to vary quite a bit. I'll read you a couple of examples here. Prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child, which basically talks about how the world is big and unchanging, and you have to make sure your kid is ready for such a big, scary world.
The world is big and unchanging. That's why we shouldn't try to change the world.
Limit device time. Sure. Pretty self-explanatory, right?
Are we still talking about college kids at this point?
And one of my favorite lessons, the dividing line between good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being.
I thought one of the untruths was that there aren't good and evil people.
It's supposed to be about how, like, we should raise kids against tribalism, but it comes off as such a weird way of saying it. It also talks about how you should give people the benefit of the doubt, which, yeah, you know, these authors have been perfect exemplars of that throughout this entire book.
Yeah, mistakenly given people the benefit of the doubt, despite the evidence that they're aware of.
They also go on in this section to talk about how we need to practice the virtue of intellectual humility and to know that our brains are flawed and we can always be wrong. And just takes a hard right turn and goes, look very carefully at how your school handles identity politics. Dude, I don't even know what's going on with these people anymore. Like, I don't know where they're trying to find these types of lessons. Like, there are some stuff in this book that, like, you know what, fine. Like, I could see, like, this is where Jonathan Haidt is known for as a social psychologist. Some of it was actually pretty interesting that I would even admit to say, like, it's not all garbage in this section. Like, when you step away from the college campuses in this book, it can actually be some interesting psychological research. I think that's really true. And when I looked it up, it seemed to play out as well. But the second they try to go into, like, this weird predictive advice part of their book, or try to talk about how we need to fix things, man, it gets bizarre.
I'm just expecting at the end of all of this, the authors take off their mask and they're like, haha, it was me, Sam Harris, all along. Because that's exactly what this all reads like to me.
They also go on in that chapter to talk about how we can create wiser universities, where they basically just talk about how we need more viewpoint diversity, whatever.
But not actual diversity.
Right. As long as it comes from white people, we can have as much diversity we want. And to end it all, they end on an optimistic note. And Jason, I'm going to let you read this for me.
As far as we can tell from private conversations, most university presidents reject the culture of safetyism. They know it is bad for students and bad for free inquiry, but they find it politically difficult to say so publicly. From our conversations with students, we believe that most high school and college students despise call-out culture and would prefer to be at a school that had little of it. Most students are not fragile, they are not snowflakes, and they are not afraid of ideas.
And this is where my brain basically snapped. Because after
the part where they go against the entire...
After 300 pages of this freaking book...
Talking about how students are fragile, they are snowflakes, and they're afraid of ideas. They say that none of that is actually true.
No, not one.
What if we told you it was all a dream?
See, and I wasn't lying to you when I told you at the beginning of this whole thing where they're going to say, we have this huge problem. By the way, it's all made up. Goodbye. See you later. Let me just read for you my note for this passage that you just read, because I was so angry as I read it. And I think this perfectly encapsulates how I feel about this book. You may need some beeps. Your entire book was about how this was a gigantic and rising problem that needed to be addressed. You even brought up a study, disingenuously I might add, to back up your point about how many college students want violence on campus or something. You used anecdotal evidence throughout this entire book, but neglected to mention that everyone you talked to went against your thesis. F it. This book is bullshit. These guys. I'm so angry that I read this stupid book.
I'm so glad you told us all about this book for 2 episodes.
You're welcome. And I don't know, man. I don't know what I was expecting going into this thing. This was one of the most, like, highly recommended best-selling books on the topic of this thing. It's consistently shown as like, hey, we have an academic and a real lawyer talking about real campus issues. I don't know, man. Maybe I just expected more. I respected Jonathan Haidt before this. Like, I knew he was controversial in some other ways, and like, I get it. You have some weird beliefs, and I could substantiate those, but I lost all respect. I can't handle it anymore. I completely understand why everyone hates Jonathan Haidt now. I hate Haidt. I hate Fire. This is bullshit. And I'm so angry I read this book. And to really finish this whole roller coaster of 2 episodes out, I just want to note that while data clearly shows that liberal faculty are fired more often for liberal speech than conservatives for conservative speech, and liberal students often report higher rates of having to silence themselves to fit in on campus, a review from the media watchdog Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, or FAIR, found that the New York Times dedicated 7 times more columns to censorship of conservative speech than liberal speech on college campuses. I think we need to remind ourselves that campus crazy culture and campus crazy narratives about how we're shutting down free speech on campuses and the safe spaces are out of control and kids are wrapping themselves up with blankets and sucking on their thumbs because they just can't handle the real world is literally made up. Yes, education is messy. Yes, we're going to have people who are probably a little too fragile, need to come out of their shells a bit. And that's on people on both sides of the political spectrum. These are young adults trying to figure out who they are in life, and we should just let them figure themselves out instead of freaking out every freaking waking minute to push a particular political narrative. I'll just include some other links at the end of this episode because we just do not have time to go through all this, but there's a bunch of research that also just backs all this up as well. There's no such thing as a war on free speech on college campuses. There's no such thing as the liberal, I don't know what you want to call it, the liberal indoctrination machine of universities and woke universities are controlling and persecuting conservatives. The idea that students are taking to violent riots and mobs to people they don't agree with is a complete myth. And as you saw, it was completely overblown because of idiots like Milo Yiannopoulos back in the day. These people have nothing to stand on. And I'm angry that we're still having to have this argument after all this time. Thank you for listening. We hope to see you in the next episode. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at ThinkProPod. You can email us at thinkpropod@gmail.com. And remember, when in doubt, think progressively. From February, you saw a New York Times article cite this article or this. Some stuff that I just found from a very 30-second Google search.
Just statistically,